Hi, it's Taylor with West Physiotherapy, and this is the second video in which I am talking about urinary leaking. And the reason is that I see this as one of the major deterrents for especially women getting out and doing the things that they want to do. Hiking, getting back into exercise classes, going on trips, traveling, all those things. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about urge incontinence. Last video, we talked about stress incontinence. Okay, so urge incontinence looks a little bit more like when I have to go, I can barely or don't quite make it to the bathroom before I start going. It might look like I'm fine until I get home, get out of the car and put the key in the door, and then, oh my gosh, it's like a race to get to the bathroom so I don't leak. You hear water running, everything's fine till you hear water running, and then you're under the gun to get to the restroom. It could be, sometimes it looks like, went to the bathroom, 30 minutes later, I felt like I had to go again. It was really urgent, went back in and only went a little bit. Okay. So those are all kind of what I hear from people who tend to have this kind of leaking. So compared to, this is same thing. If you're leaking, pressure out greater than pressure up and in. But in this situation, the pressure down and out has more to do with the bladder itself versus in stress incontinence, the pressure down and out has more to do with your activity and increased mechanical forces, intra-abdominal pressure from the outside of the bladder down onto the bladder, whereas the bladder is really the thing initiating some of this pressure down and out in this situation. So why would the bladder do that? It's really annoying if you've experienced it. The best way to kind of understand what's happening is to understand a little bit about how the bladder works when things are going smoothly and you have a nice relationship with your bladder and it's not giving you any stress or concern. So the bladder is, we talked a little bit about a pelvic floor being influenced by the autonomic nervous system. This is the nervous system that's running things in the background that we don't have to do a lot of thinking about to control. Breathing, heart rate, sweating, gut mobility and motility, that kind of thing. So the bladder is a smooth muscle. It's controlled by the autonomic nervous system, right? So, and it's really a complicated neural communication and dance between basically our cognition and awareness and this kind of nervous system that's running in the background. So ideally, when things are running smoothly, you're taking in fluid throughout the day. The bladder, which is a smooth muscle and has the capacity to stretch a bit and fill, is gradually filling, and it's intermittently communicating with us what's happening with it so that we can make a plan, because we're in charge. We can make a plan for when we're going to go to the bathroom. So it starts to fill a little bit, and its first communication with us is usually just kind of like an FYI. Hey, I noticed you've been drinking and, everything's working well. This seems to be making its way down to me, and I'm, hanging out here and gradually filling. Just thought I'd let you know. And you sort of say, okay, thanks. Good to know. And you go on about your business. Then you continue drinking a little bit throughout the day. The bladder continues filling a little bit, and now it's filled a bit more, and it says, hey, I'm not uncomfortable, but I am filling up. And so, just so you know, at some point, I am going to want a potty break. And you say, okay, thanks for letting me know. I'm not worried about it because I know where the bathroom is, so I'm going to keep working or doing whatever I'm doing here. If you're in the car, you might say, oh, thank you for telling me because we just passed the exit and I'm on the lookout for the next one because I know it could take 30 minutes to get there. All right, then the third message is typically a little more serious. The bladder is really making a request of you at this point. Hey, I'm pretty full and it's let's do this. It's time to go to the bathroom and take care of this. And at that point, you say, okay, yeah, I'm with you. Let's do it. Or if you're really, really busy, you're like, no, just a little bit longer, then anybody can end up with some leaking at that point, because you at that point, that's kind of on you. You sort of ignored your bladder. But so that's how things kind of go when things are going smoothly. So what happens when it feels like you don't get all of that time and all of those messages? The first indication you get is like, oh my gosh, if I don't go now, I'm going to have to change my pants. All right. So one thing that can be happening, okay, is basically what is the environment of the bladder? Okay, so two things can contribute to this: the environment on the outside, and one of the things that I think can be related to this is scar tissue in the abdominal cavity. Maybe you had appendix removal, C-section scar, but there's something that's affecting the tension on the bladder itself, and that could be giving it some cues or decreasing its flexibility in terms of stretching and being able to accommodate filling more and more. And it might make its signals a little more urgent to you because it doesn't feel like it has the capacity to continue to fill. Okay. The other thing is the environment inside the bladder. So if we're drinking mostly water, then, urine is really clear. There are not many chemical irritants inside the bladder because the urine is fairly diluted by all the water. But if we're not having a lot of water, or we tend to drink things that can be irritating to the bladder, like caffeine, alcohol, acidic things like citrus juices, that kind of thing, then that's more irritating to the bladder. The bladder is more inclined to get that fluid out. And so its signals to you are going to be a little bit more urgent to move that out. Interestingly, you may notice that maybe your drinking habits haven't changed, your fluid intake hasn't changed, but you feel like this urgency is coming on more. And I think sometimes what's happening is our bladders, not unlike us, as they age, they just get a little less tolerant of nonsense. And so it could be that you got away with some things when you were younger, and now your bladder is it's a little more sensitive. It's just not putting up with it anymore. And so, unfortunately, sometimes that happens. Okay. The second thing I want to talk about is, I think this is kind of where the rubber hits the road with this. And it's important to talk about because I've had women who, once they kind of understood basically how things kind of were working when things were going smoothly, and what's going on now that they have this problem or something that's just not working for them anymore, they're able to gain a lot of control and sometimes solve the problem on their own without a lot of intervention. Not all the time, but I have seen that happen. So the other thing is basically kind of behavior modification. And what has happened, the bladder has you've kind of trained the bladder, and the bladder has kind of trained you. So once you have some experiences where maybe you feel like you had to rush to the bathroom, or you leaked a little bit, or you had just negative experience, you start trying to avoid that. So you start paying a little more attention, taking the messages from the bladder maybe a little more seriously. So maybe at that second message, you say, "Ooh," your bladder says, "Hey, kind of full." You say, "Oh, okay. Let me take care of it. Let me empty you because I don't want any problems." And you start emptying more frequently. You start emptying sooner. You start going to the bathroom maybe when you don't have to go because you want to avoid a situation where you can't find a bathroom. And what happens is the bladder gets more and more accustomed to emptying sooner and sooner. It gets less and less accustomed to stretching. And so it starts to feel almost like a little more and more entitled to emptying sooner and sooner. And next thing you know, it's like maybe it's only at a third to a half capacity, and it's like it's an emergency, and it's going to go whether you have decided you're going to go or not. There's a lot to be done with kind of gradually retraining the bladder, and you're kind of like taking some control back from the bladder and helping it calm down and become more accustomed to stretching and suppressing urge and delaying gratification and all these things. And that those techniques are usually called bladder retraining or urge suppression. And those can be really helpful with this type of leaking and can work really well. They just take some time and building on small wins. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is posture again. This, I think, is not usually the main driver of this kind of leaking, but I think it's a layer that's very important and it often gets missed. And if you can tap into it, then you may see some changes sooner. All right, so we're talking about nervous system, nerves communicating these things, and we've been talking a lot about the bladder itself and then our cognitive awareness. But the nerves to the bladder, the autonomic nerves to the bladder, come off of the spine, kind of in a transition zone between the thoracic spine or your trunk and your low back. And this is an area in the spine where a lot of people have some dysfunction. And so anytime you have dysfunction in your spine, then that can be affecting basically the efficacy of the nerves to the periphery or to the bladder itself. So keeping a healthy spine and all these transition zones where we know the nerves to the organs are coming off can be a really great strategy to try to just maintaining your overall health of those organ systems and nervous systems. All right, so what I would say is if you feel like you have some of these symptoms, start with a bladder diary. It's really tedious, it's not a lot of fun, but this is a really good way to quantify what's happening, to really see what are the fluids that you're taking in, with what frequency, with what amount, and then when you're going to the bathroom and when you're leaking. So that's really helpful. You can find a grid for that online. You could just make one yourself. You're just jotting down the time that all those things happen. There are some on apps on your phone. If you tend to keep your phone with you, there's one called Vesica, and so you can keep track of it that way, and it actually makes a little PDF file that you can share from your phone itself, like to a practitioner, and so that's a nice feature. Bladder retraining and urge suppression. So just you're kind of starting a dialogue with your bladder and understanding that it's communicating with you, but you have some say in this partnership too. And just because I can't stand to end on just bladder diary and urge suppression, I'm going to do a separate video of a nice way to kind of mobilize that transition zone and do a little neuromuscular control. So thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to comment or send me a message. And the final video in this series that I'll post later this week will be about waking at night because you have to go to the bathroom. So urgency to urinate, waking you at night and interrupting your sleep. Okay, thanks. Bye.